Hello, this is Danny from CG Dreams. This is part 3 of the bee rigging tutorial, and we're going to be going through the finishing off of the leg controllers, rigging the antennae, the mandible, the mouth rig, wings including IKFK, and finally we're going to be adding some dynamics to the wings. So let's get started. Moving on to part 3 of this video tutorial, we're going to start off with making 3 controllers for the base of each leg. We're going to start with the back leg, and as we've been doing so far, in order to select this in the object manager, we just hover over it and press the S key and it selects it. There's 2 versions of the way that we can set this controller up. This controller can be a rather simple controller where it's invisible to the scene and it acts as an anchor point to the body, so that when the body moves, the legs are going to move with it. The other way is a more technical setup where we can have a FK, forward kinematic controller here, where it acts independently of the FK so that we can rotate it as well as having control over the FK. But for simplicity of this tutorial, I'm going to go with the latter, the more easier or simplified method of doing this, because really all the movement can be found that's needed within the FK setup anyway. We're going to select this joint, we're going to hold down the shift key and make a null, and then we're going to copy the naming of this joint and paste it into the null. We're going to do this the same for every single leg. The next thing is we're going to remove this from where it's currently located, and we're going to just put it in the master controller right up here, and then we're going to assign a parent constraint. So first of all, select the joint, then the controller, and then we're going to go and assign this. Now I've got my own pipeline set up here for this where I can apply the parent constraint. Of course you can go to the character menu, into the constraints, and apply a parent constraint there. So do this for all 3 legs. We can expand, and then we do that for that leg, and then we do that for that leg, following the same procedure. When you've done this, we're going to rename this slightly by taking off that part at the beginning there and just call this root, and do the same thing for the other ones. If I was to use this as a rotational controller, well, I would have used a spline controller to start with, and I would be calling this ROT, short for rotation. We're now going to select all 3 of these controllers and drag and drop them in the body controller. This means that now when we select the body controller, whatever we do with that, the legs are going to move along with it. The only difference here is that the feet will remain on the ground where they belong. I now want to backtrack and go to the abdomen and select the abdomen bone where the IK tag is located. What I want to do here is I just want to add a pole for additional control over the movement of the abdomen. As before, the pole gets selected and made, but we can actually create our own one with inside this, so that's what I'm going to do, as I've been doing so far. I'm going to hold down the shift key. I'm going to select this as we've been using so far, and I'm just going to scale this down so it's appropriate for the area that we're working on. I'm going to select this, holding down the control key while we're rotating simultaneously, and then introducing the shift key until we're locked to 90 degrees. Then select both of these and then combine them, connect objects and delete. I'm now going to go and select our IK again, and then drag and drop this new controller in there. Again, you shouldn't be seeing any popping or changing in here. With that done, I'm now going to copy the naming of this and put it into there, and we can do away with this after we drag this out. We're going to put this in the correct location in a moment, but for now I'm just going to drag this to the very top. This we don't need no more. As we've noted so far, whenever we create one of these that are a visual pole, we normally want to move it so that we can see it, but you'll notice that you're getting a very slight movement when you move this. You can see that, and this slight movement is just for the fact that it's actually flipping around. You can't really see it very clearly, but you can, if you go closer, see this flipping around. And the way you can see this is on the axis point here. If you look closely, you can see this flipping. You see the Y is going up, and then when you start to move this, it goes down. So it's easy to fix this. We go back into our IK tag for the pole and the axis here. We normally have to just put this to the Y, and it flips it back to where it was before. Sometimes, in some cases, you have to put it to negative Y, but in all cases, it's going to be one of these that flips it to the correct way. As before, we want to move this to such a location where we're going to be able to select it and control it. And the best way to judge this is to turn the meshes back on so that we can see how far it is away from the mesh. Of course, you can move this until you fine-tune it to your liking. Because you may find at some point that it gets in the way of something. With that selected, I'm going to go into the IK. There's the attributes, and we're going to advance, and you can see we've got all of this on here, but in display we can turn off this handle. We don't want to see this handle in there showing. And we go back to the IK settings, the main ones, and we just look and see everything seems to be fine in there, and we're good to move on to the next stage. So just to remind you, the purpose of this is so that it gives us a wiggle, a rotational wiggle of the abdomen when we're using it in conjunction with this. So if I was to say move that to there, then you'll see we've got this additional movement there, and that's why I've added it. I also want to go back to the display properties for the IK and select none so that this doesn't get in the way. And you can do the same thing for these other ones as well where you've got an IK. The best way to do this in bulk is to go to our filter, and inside the filter you'll be able to see and locate all of the IKs. So there they are. We can double click and it selects all of them. We can then go in there and click on none, and they will all be hidden from sight in the viewport. We'll just turn that filter back off, and we just give this a colour of some sort. So I don't think we've assigned any colours to them just yet, so we'll do that a little bit later on. To create the antennae, I'm going to select the head and solo it so we can only see that, and we're going to make the joints like we did before by a selection set. So we're going to double click in the center point of this ball socket, and then we're going to go to the next logical point in which we're going to be creating that from. So this would be again locating it within the center point of that ball socket if you want it to be really accurate. Now the way in which you can do this is you can actually just seep inside the object here, and you actually better see where that center point is going to be within the inside. And what I want you to do is I want you to go down and select that, and then continue to go down and select this last point that you can visibly see here. If you can, select this one here. If there's one visible, then select it. If you can't select one there, then select the next one above it. When you've selected that, it's always a good idea to store a selection set in case you deselect it accidentally. So we're going to store that, and we're going to name it Anternae. From this selection set, we're going to go to our character, convert, and then hold down the shift key and then selection to joints. As before, when we did with the leg, you'll see here that there's no hierarchical order, and that these axis points or locators are actually very, very large. So the first thing we do is select all of these, go to our object, and then change the joint to custom, and then we'll bring that down to 0 in most cases, and then we just bump it up in increments with the Alt key held down. You can see here a 0.02. Now 0.2 is a nice size for us to be working with. Now, as before, it's always a good idea to hide the geometry when we're doing this. So we go to meshes, we will hide them, and we'll select one joint at a time and put it into the correct hierarchical order. So I'm going to speed this up just to get through this process a little bit quicker. We're now going to select all of these joints by middle mouse clicking on the topmost parent, and then in the naming we're just going to call it one single digit, like 1 as an example there. Then we're going to go to our naming tool. The naming tool can be found in the tools menu, but for me it's docked here. And then we're going to do some work in here. So we want to replace 1 with something else. I'm going to just do that now. There's already something in there from the previous, and we're dealing with an antennae now, so we can leave what's already there as left because we know it's the left hand side. Antennae, and then we're going to just add an underslash or a dash, and we're going to do the $sign and a capital N and click rename. And now we've got them all named as they should be. The next thing we can do is we're going to create a IK chain. So we're going to select the top and the last of the joints, and they're going to create that IK chain. Now when we select the goal, which is automatically done by default, you can see here we've got this nice movement in there. We're going to create a custom controller for this, so I'm going to do something that I did before. I can even go and make my own custom controller. So as an example here, I can select this sphere, this circle, and I can rotate it, shift key held down, just to make something a bit more three-dimensional. Combine these together. It's something very, very basic and simple. And then I'm going to just copy it from there and paste it into my scene, where we can further change the scale and of course its position. I'm going to use the transfer tool, and that can be found in the tools menu. So I'm going to select this, select the transfer. I'm going to enable rotation in this particular case, and I'm going to choose the IK goal and apply. And then from there I'm just simply going to scale it down. And it really is that simple. Now I've done this, I'm going to now go to the IK again, and I'm going to replace the goal with the new one and delete the old one. Remember that we need to keep the name convention, so I'm just going to copy this just for convenience, and then add the IK on the end. Now we need to put the joints where they belong. So at the moment you can see the joints here are just at the very top of there. Before I do this, I'm going to go to the layers. I'm going to drag and drop these joints into there so that it's color coded them, and I'm going to move these inside the head joint. So I'm going to collapse down the controller, the master controller, and I'm going to expand the rig, and you can see here in the thorax we're going to have the head. So what we want to do is we want to drag and drop the entire lot of the antennae into the head end like that. And now that's done, we can now grab this antennae and put this in the correct place. Again, I'm going to assign it as a controller, and I'm going to drag and drop this inside the head controller. So that's asked to open up the master controller here, and you can see here there's the head. Drag and drop that inside the head. Now what should happen is when we select the head controller, what it's going to do is it's going to move the entire rig with the antennae. As usual, we want to make sure all our controllers are set so that they can go back to an original state. So we're going to select the middle mouse button, go to chords, and then click on freeze all. The next thing is to create the mandible. I've selected the geometry for the head and hidden that from the select menu up here, and so it only shows what we need to be seeing. From this, I'm going to select the loops, as you can see here. So we've got a loop at the end, the middle, and the best that we can do up here at the top, which is these two here. Now what we want to do is we want to actually have the first joint aligning up with the top here, but we can adjust that after we've done the next process. So with the shift key held down, we're going to go to our character menu, convert, and then selection to joints, and that gives us 3 joints. The first joint that we want to select is going to be the one that we want to move, but before we do that, we're going to just select these 3, go to our object tab, and then inside where it says display access, we're going to bring this down to 0, and then with the Alt key we can just incrementally just make this big enough so we can see them. So that we can see them now, I can select the first joint, which is this one here, and I can just move this up so that it's aligned much more better than it is at the moment. So let's move this up more to the direction to where it's going to be located. Now the only problem I've got with this is just the fact that it's really not aligned to the geometry too well, and that's not really helpful for us. So it'd be a good idea to kind of get that aligned a bit better right from the offset. So just to show you where things are at the moment, we're going to want it to be aligned in a completely different way as it is at the moment to what the joints have been so far. So the y-axis pointing straight out from it. So when you're facing it, you can actually see the green ring. That means that it's pointing up. And when you point this direction, you can see the blue ring, which means it's pointing down. And then of course the red ring from either side. So that means we've got it at the right axis, and this is really fundamentally important that we do this, because the other joints are going to be able to align to this one. Not only that, it's going to be much easier now for us to move this joint up closer to where the pivot point should actually be, which is around about here. So that's where we're going to take it from. So that's good. Now we can start connecting these joints together. So the second one is there. I'm going to drag that inside joint 2, and of course we've only got one left, which takes us to the very end. Now all we need to do is just need to create some alignment between these joints. The first and obvious thing that you can do is you can select these joints, both of these, and then click on the align, and that's going to give us a really good starting point, and in some cases it can actually sort it completely. And as you can see, it has done exactly that. It's actually sorted the alignment right first time. The end joint, again, that's done the same thing, so we're good to go. If it didn't, we would select both of these joints, and then we will go to the joint align tool, and then we would, at the moment it's on aim, it should be on I believe object axis. We can right click and revert that to up direction to default, and that would fix it also. But as it happens, just doing what I've done has fixed that problem with the alignment. So now we've got 3 joints all aligned up perfectly where they should be. The next stage is to get some controllers in there, as well as obviously naming the joints. So let's go and name these joints. I'm going to select all of them by middle mouse clicking. We're going to go to the basic tab, and you can see in here where the name is. I'm just going to call this L underscore mandible, and then we're going to apply that, and there's only a couple there, so we're going to call this mandible 1, 2, just pressing the down arrow, and 3. There's only a few joints there. It's not worth using the name tool for that. The controller I'm going to use is the controller that I saved earlier on, and it's basically a replica of this controller that we've already got. So that's enable the visibility of this. In fact, let's keep the visibility off. I'm just going to create a copy of this, and I'm going to name this right here and now. Let's copy some of the name convention from that, and then we name it. We just put CTRL, left mandible control, so we know what we're dealing with. We turn on the visibility. I'm going to go to the axis center and then center this for its default settings, and this is going to give us a better kind of way of aligning and orientating what we've got. Let's just pull this out the way for the moment and down closer to where the mandible is, so we can judge the scale of this. You can clearly see that the scale is way too big at the moment. Let's just bring this a little bit closer, and we can scale this down a little bit. Now we can do an align to axis by means of transfer tool. So I'm going to get this, use the transfer tool found in the tool menu, and we're going to transfer it to the first joint that we've created. And now that's aligned up. Now let's rotate this 90 degrees with the shift key held down. And then I'm going to select the actual geometry in points mode. Let's see where we are with the alignment with that. That's not too well aligned at the moment, so I'm going to leave the geometry where it is. It seems to be a pretty good alignment by itself, but I'm going to turn on the axis tool just to adjust the alignment to roughly where it should be in the middle. This is just so it's easy just to make a final placement. There's nothing obviously to stop us from using the snap tools. For instance, we can snap to there and then do some alignments with the rotation. But this only has to be rough, just roughly. Just while I make a final placement for this. I think we are good to go with this. So now I can just move this controller forwards and roughly to where I feel it should be, so it's easy to select later on. So I want it away from obviously the geometry, not too far away. We could do a projection if you wanted to. To project, so we got the curvature of the mandible, but I feel that it's good enough for the curve there, and I'm quite happy with that. So that's going to be the controller for that. Then we can see what we're going to do from this, from what we've done so far, is we're going to select the mandible number 1 and we're going to make it give control over to our controller that we've just made with a parent constraint. Before I do that, I want to put this in its own folder or null. So I'm going to hold the shift key down, create that null, drag it out, and then drag in the joint into that, copy the name into there, and then I'm just going to call this root. It's going to share the same orientation as the joint that it's in, which is really, really important. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to drag this into the head joint or the head tip. It doesn't really matter which that you drag it into. What's the most important thing here is that when the head moves, so does the mandible. And I'm pretty happy with everything so far. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to assign this null, the null itself. You can do the joint as well if you wanted to. You can go straight to the joint. Sometimes I like to use both for different things. In this particular case it's going to be pretty simple. So I'm going to go to the null, animate the null with the joint in it, and then select the controller that we've made, the left mandible, and then assign a parent constraint. This parent constraint now is going to be the thing that we select in order to rotate this. Now, selecting this parent constraint, I'm going to go to coordinates, freeze all, and go to layers. I'm going to drag and drop that into controllers, so it's got that there. The abdomen pole that we made earlier on also needs to be assigned as a controller. So these are two things that we're going to need to put in the right places. That's just closed down the rig hierarchy there, and then we will go into what we need to look into, the master controller. So the body, we know already that inside the body we've already got some controllers. We've got the abdomen here and the IK. We want this to follow the IK for the abdomen, so we will drag it inside the IK for the abdomen like that. This means that whenever we are to use this IK, it's going to follow. Obviously the body will be following at this point as well. And then of course you've got this separate control on top of that. That rotates the whole lot of bones there for the abdomen. So that's done. With the mandible, this belongs to the head, so you can guess what we're going to do. We're going to drag and drop this into the head controller. And this now means that whenever we move the head, the mandible moves and our antennae moves. So we're looking really good here. And you can see why we're making this hierarchical arrangement within these controllers and how much easier it is to work when we do this. For the mouth area, An area that we may just be referring to like the tongue, this is something that you may or may not have with your version of the bee. If you don't have this, you may want to skip this part of the tutorial and move on to the next stage. But if you're still intrigued how you can rig this, or you actually have gone ahead and tried to make something like this, then stick around to watch this part. Now the mouth area is rather complex and it's made up of multiple parts. So I'm going to break this down into multiple parts. You can see here in my scene tree that I've actually got all of these separate parts in here, and we're going to deal with them one at a time. We've already dealt with the antennae, so I'm going to just delete them out the scene for now, just so we can see what we need to be concentrating on. So let's first of all look at this part here, and we'll just disable the visibility of all the others. So this part here is called the labial, and if I was to go to the mesh of this, just so we can see it a little bit more clearer, there we go. There we go, just so we can see it as a straight flat out geometry. So we've got this part of here, the labial, and this is basically a bone that starts off as the main child. We'll select that first bone, and then that goes off into what I call a left hip, and it goes off into a right hip, and just go a little bit further down, which is here. We go a little bit closer, you can see here like the left hip and the right hip of this particular joint. Then they've each got their individual bones, labial 0 all the way to 6. So I'm going to select both of these, both sides, so you can see which bone we're talking about, this big long bone. So one central bone, the labial base, then we've got a hip that goes off to the left and the right, and then we've got the individual bones that are connected to that. And it's simply going from there to the next joint, and from that joint to the next joint of the geometry, and there and to there, all the way to the end. And that's that part of that. If I enable the controllers, you can see here that we've got 2 controllers on there, and you can see here that we've got an IK controller just for the tip. And I've done this with the lack of understanding of just how this really functions in real life, so that if it does actually have a movement of its own accord, then I can go ahead and start to move it. If it doesn't, I can just leave it and it hasn't caused any problems. So I've just been thorough with this. So that's that part of there. If I was to click on this, you can see here that we've actually got an IK, the same as we selected up all the other joints like the leg. We've got an IK, and we've even got a pole vector for this to make sure that it's kept straight. And then we've got the main IK, which moves the whole jointed area entirely. You can see there. Let's go back and put that back. So that's the labial part, and it's pretty much rigged just like it is a leg. Then we've got another IK, which is like similar to like the claw end of the leg, and this is obviously this end of things where this is assigned to. So when we click on here and we go and look down here, we've got this goal, and when we select this goal, we select element. It's actually this side. This is the goal that moves this part. So there's nothing really special about this, anything different to what has already been shown in this so far. So we can go to the labial area now that we've called labial, and we disable the visibility of this. And for the sake of purposes of this video, I'm going to just select this and also hide it so that we can break it down. So the next part that we're going to go to, and we can actually just delete that from the scene. I'm not going to save over it, so it doesn't matter. Next thing is you've got the pre-mentum. The pre-mentum has only got a couple of joints in there. So let's have a look and see what that is. And the pre-mentum is this part of the geometry that I'm about to select now. Let's just select this. This is the pre-mentum. And the pre-mentum is just simply one joint with a joint tip in order to make it a bone. Very, very simple with that. Now you'll see here the pre-mentum has been given a parent constraint, and then when we select that parent constraint, we're going to select element. You can see that we've got this shape here. And then when we select this, you'll see here that it's linked directly to the root of the bone. That's where it's originating from, and all that does is simply allows us to move it, rotate it like that. Now it has got a secondary function to this, is that not only does it rotate, but it actually shifts up as well inside. Now anatomically correctly would be it to fold up behind the head, and that's something that I didn't go into the detail of doing, but there'll be a section in the back of the head where this actually all folds up into. Part of it folds and part of it bends into place. But this certainly serves a very basic function of that pre-mentum. So let's go and select this pre-mentum here with these bones. And there's nothing more to it than that. We will go in there and select the pre-mentum, and I'm just going to delete it from the scene just so we can break it down as we go. And now we've got this part here. This part here, well actually it's the galea next, so we deal with the galea next. So the galea are these parts here, and this particular part of the galea that we're dealing with here is what is, if I just move it, you'll see that there's something inside it. This part of the galea that I've selected here is the translucent part of what's going to be a material translucent applied to it. So this actually moves along with these joints that I'm selecting now, the galea joints. Okay, so we've got these galea joints. So we will trace these in a minute, the galea joints, and we've got a left and we've got a right, as you would expect. And just to reiterate that this part here will be bound to the galea joints. We will delete or hide that so we can see what's underneath it. And this is the main kind of body of the galea, the left and right. And this also is going to be bound to exactly the same galea joints. Now let's have a look at these joints. We will select them from the first joint, left and right. You see there. And you'll see the first joint, left and right, it's been assigned to a controller with their parent constraint. If we were to then select this controller, select element, you can see here that this controller, and that's to highlight it here, this controller is called strips or stripes. That's controlling the actual first part or the segment of this whole area here. And you can see here, if we were to select this, let's just move this forwards. that this is what I made as a controller. So let's just rotate this, and it gives us this movement, and it gives us this movement. So that is what that does. It's a controller that's signed to the joint, and then we've got another controller down here that's assigned to the second joint. And these controllers are actually the controllers that are assigned to those two joints. Let's just select them and go down them. So you can see here we've got the Gallia. That's the first controller that goes up to the one that's this one here. And then we've got the next one here, and the controller goes to the next controller, and that is to bend the joint. And again, if we select this, we select the element, you can see here that this is the actual controller that we select. So when it's in use, is these controllers, we can gain access to the top part as a whole, and then the bottom part like that. So again, we've got this independent control. There's nothing really more to it than that. It is pretty simple when it comes to that. So that's just select the Gallia left and right, and we'll just delete it. And the last bit here is the glosser. And the glosser is this main part of the tongue. I'll select the geometry for this part here. And this is the part of the tongue that comes down, and it's got a lot of little pores on it that will absorb the nectar or even honey, and it will curl. It's got a curling motion to this. So I'll show you what I did with this. Let's just expand this. So if we select this controller here, you can see it's got a standard parent controller, and the joints are going from the top to the bottom. Now these joints are all equal in length, as you'll notice there, and there's an easy way to do this. To show you in another scene, I'm going to draw a load of random joints in the scene. All different lengths. Okay, and I want all of these to be the same length. So what I can do is I can select all of these joints in the objects, and you can see here that you've got a length. Now if you take it down to 0 and then take it back up again, it will actually lengthen them all exactly the same length. Now if you need then to make this match the length of geometry, all you have to do is select the first joint and scale up and down so that it is the right length for the geometry, and that is exactly how I did it for that. So let's go back. We've got all these joints through there, and I'll show you what we did about this in a moment here. It's very, very easy to do. Now what we wanted to happen here is we wanted to be able to select all of these and have our controller, and I will just select the controller right now, have this controller be responsible for doing this. See that? And the way that we do this is really, really simple. This is something that I can actually indeed show you from something I already started with. So let's just create a controller. We'll transfer it to the first joint. Okay. We could do with that controller being on a different axis like that. And we're going to assign the first joint to the controller via a parent constraint. So that's done. Now with the controller selected and in rotation mode, I want you to just look at the coordinates for this as I rotate. Okay, now at the moment we've already got coordinates in here, so the first thing we need to do is we need to freeze all. Now if we start to rotate this, you'll see only one coordinate moving, as you can see there, just one. This is the one that we need to be the driver to drive the rest of the joint. So what we do is we right click on here, it's the pitch, we go to expressions and click set driver. Now we go to all of the other joints and select them all, and we go to the pitch of all of these, right click, expressions, and set driven absolute. And then what it will do is it will create all of these expressions on there. Okay, and what this will do is it will make sure that they all follow this movement of rotation, and it's as simple as that. This is how I made this particular part of the tongue. Now of course with the tongue you'd always need a main root controller for the tongue, or the mouth area, which is going to grab all of the parts, and then you can use that to move the whole entire tongue straight up into the head, or indeed if you wanted to you could make it so it rotates behind the head and works that way. But this is basically how the tongue was made. It's using methods that I've already shown you, other than possibly setting the driver to driven with the espresso, but it's all pretty straightforward, and it's a really nice effect that you can get from this. For the wings, we're going to stick to the left hand side, and we're going to treat the wings as individuals as far as there being a small and a large wing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to expand here, and we've got the small and large wings, and we're going to start with the large wings and just disable the visibility of the small wings. The primary importance of this is that we get enough joints in here to create a smooth bend in the wings, but we also make sure that the pivot point of the first joint starts right dead center of this particular ball of the socket, so that it can rotate correctly when it's located inside the socket of the thorax. It's so important that we have this set up properly. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go from the top view and I'm going to start drawing out some joints. Now there's several ways in which you can do this. You can simply just start by creating a joint from, say, here, roughly where the middle is, or you can turn on the visibility to see the lines, use your snapping, which can be a good idea, and snap to the center there. Now we're going to need to move it down obviously, but this is going to give us a good point to start from by clicking there to create that first joint. And then going to the very end and finding another point in which you feel would be kind of central, and this gives us one single bone. Now it's a good idea if you kind of decide how many bones you want to be inside that. I'm going to disable the snapping, and what I'm going to do with the joint tool selected still, I'm going to just randomly, doesn't matter where you click precisely, but you hold on the shift key and you can simply start dividing this up to give you enough joints to get a smooth movement when the wing bends. So you can see here I've created a number of joints, and you can see here they're all here. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to select that topmost joint. I'm going to make sure that it's definitely located correctly in the center of that ball of that wing, and then we're going to look at it from another angle and see where it's located from this other angle. And we will also look in the, you can see here that it's really put in a good pivot position. So I'm really pleased with that. Now it depends on where you've modelled your wings in 3D space. So you may find that you're going to need to move this top joint up or down to get it locked into the center position as possible. Another way to make sure that you lock it is by turning on this enable snap, turning off everything other than axis, and this can help to get it in the middle. But what I would tend to do is I would tend to create another ball like a sphere and place that sphere inside this ball and socket, and make sure that the sphere has its center point where it should be by default anyway. And then we can use the axis of that sphere to locate the axis of the sphere of this ball. I hope that makes sense. So I'm just going to show you very quickly with this what I mean. We just shrink that down. We want to locate this right inside the center of this. I'm only going to do this roughly. I'm not going to have to snap in on when I do this. I'm just going to just give you an idea of what I'm talking about here. By default, the center pivot point in this sphere is dead center. So as long as we can put this dead center of the ball and socket, scale it up, this is going to give us a point to lock to. Let's just move that along. You might want to play around with this till you get it exactly right. And then when you're moving the root bone, you can then turn on your snapping with the axis enabled, and you can actually snap to the axis of this sphere that you've placed inside, and then you can delete it afterwards. And that's something that I found I actually had to do. Now, as far as the individual joints is concerned, they're not all the same length. So what I will do is I'll go into the object and select the length slide and go to 0. And then I will start to slide it up to get it roughly the length of the wing. And then what you can do is, with the first joint selected, you can just look at the end here, turn on your scale, and just scale it up until it reaches the very end. And this way, what you've got is you've got all of the joints equal length, starting at the pivot point where you want it, and having the amount of joints that you require to be inside it. The next stage would be for us to name these joints. So we're going to do a similar process that we've done before. I'm going to go to my custom layout here, which has got all of the tools that we've been using so far, and I've already mentioned where they are in the user interface, the default one. We're going to select with the middle mouse button on the top joint, the one that's the parent to all the children within. And we're going to go to the basic tab, and we're going to name this 1. It doesn't really matter what you name it, as long as it's something simple. And then we're going to go to the renaming tool, or the naming tool found in the tools menu. And we're going to replace 1 with left underscore large wing at a dash, and we're going to use this suffix that we've already used before. You can type this in manually, but I've already got it in there already, so I'm just going to copy and paste this, and this is going to give us the numbering between the joints. So it's going to look like left under slash large wing 0, 1, 2, 3, 4 and so on. So let's click on replace, and now we've got that in there. And you've got this, you can see it says 15. Now this is because we got this suffix added to there as well. We don't need that as well. We just make sure we remove that, and there we go. We've got it 0 to 15, and that's all we need for this. In the root, I'm going to copy this and put this into the root. Large, left large wing. Okay, that's all we need for this for the moment. We're going to move this later on. We're going to just leave it for the moment low. We're now going to create an IK tag, and what I'm going to do is I'm just going to select the top one and go all the way to the end, and then we're going to add the create IK chain. That gives us the goal. The goal we're going to replace with our own type of controller, and this is where we can use something that we've already created before, such as this one here. This is the one that we've already used before, and because that's the case, I'm going to replicate this rather than use it, so I can use it for something else again. The first thing I'm going to do with this controller is make sure that the axis center has put the center pivot point to where it should be, and then I'm going to move it over to the position and rotation of the axis of this first joint here. We're going to use the transfer tool for that. So the transfer tool found in the tools menu, or in my UI, I've placed it here, and we're going to pick the first joint and then click apply. Now you can see what it's done there. The joint hierarchy that's in there at the moment is showing that the axis for the Y is currently going the wrong direction. That's something that I should have checked before I'd done that last move. So let's just backtrack, put that back there, and we will sort that alignment out. And let's have a look at the first one. They seem to be all that way. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to rotate the first one. The shift key held down. We're going to rotate it 90 degrees, and then you'll see that it's actually rotated the whole lot. It's a straight set of joints with the Z going down the joint, the Y going up, and the X to the side. Now we will run through that same process again. We will select this, we'll use the transfer tool, and then apply, and now you can see that it's applied it and it's kept it upright because the orientation is correct now. Now rather us moving the orientation again, which we don't want to do, we want to only move the geometry. So we'll select point mode, select all the geometry, and I'm going to rotate it, and it looks like it's misaligned anyway there. That's move its pivot point, I think, and we'll lock it to there. Just going to manually adjust this so it's a little bit more straighter. Take the snapping off. Let's move that somewhere down there. We could even go as far as locking it to the pivot point of this joint if we wanted to. Just so it makes it a little bit easier when we go to rotate it. So we've got a 90-degree rotation. I think I can go a little bit further than that. Just aligning it up more closer to where I visually want it. It's only a visual. This is a visual control. You can spend as long as you wish on this. You also would want to take care of looking at the rest of the geometry to see where it's going to get in the way of anything else. We can go back to this in either case, and this is where our alignment is, and it's perfectly in line with the center position of this, and it's so important that we have this centered there. So this is the wing controller. We're just going to move this at the top for the moment here. I'm going to rename this accordingly. Left underscore large wing ROT, short for rotational controller. And then what we're going to do, I'm just going to look at, you see that first null there? That first null isn't actually aligning the same way as the rest of these are. This means that I can't really use this null for anything else that I want to. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a brand new one. I'm going to drag this outside of there. I'm going to copy the name of this one, but we don't need to keep it. I'm going to create a brand new one inside there. Drag it out, put the name back in, and then drag everything back in. The reason I've done this is because I want this null to match the alignment of the joint, that first joint there. It's very, very important because this wing has got to have multiple functions. One of the functions is going to be directly on the bone, and another function that we're going to be applying for its flapping control is going to be applied to the null. And this is why we need to make sure that these match. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to select this and then select the controller. And I'm going to assign a parent control. So a parent constraint. And in the parent constraint, the only thing that we need is rotation, for it to control rotation. That's the only thing we need. Now, because we've got a goal, it's created a goal for us. We just select that goal. That goal's at the end. We need to make a IK goal for this, for us to control this. And we can use something different for this. Maybe we can go back to our controllers and use this one. Let's press the S key to go to this, and I'm going to just copy this out of there, move this to the top. Anything that's inside of it we don't need. We just want the controller. I'm going to go to the axis center and center it, and then we're going to use this as an IK control for the end of the wing. We don't need to make it so big. And probably best to use the transfer tool, I think. We'll transfer it to the original position of the IK goal. Then we go to the IK tag and then replace what was there, which was this, with this one here. And when you do this, always look at the screen to make sure the joints are not popping or moving. When I say popping, I mean a sudden jerking motion of the joints, where they suddenly just move an odd way. We don't want that to happen. Now I'm going to delete the old goal. That's the new goal. This goal needs to go inside this controller, because this controller needs to also move the IK. So we will put that inside the rotation controller. And then the result of that will be that when we select this controller, we're going to be able to rotate the entire wing like that, but simultaneously have the control over the IK of the wing. The only thing that's missing now is a pole to keep that wing straight. So what we will do is we will select that IK tag, we will add a pole. We've done this a few times now. A lot of this is repetition. We drag this to the top so we can work on it independently. And I'm going to stick to the same kind of shape that we've been using so far for the poles. So that's just bring it down to an appropriate size. I'm going to copy that, or as I've done before, I've just held down the control key while I'm rotating, and then the shift key afterwards to join that to lock to 90 degrees, and then I will combine the two, connect objects and delete. We will copy this and paste it into there, and then go to our IK tag where it's got the pole, and we're going to replace what's there at the moment there with this one instead. We can drag that out now and delete that. Now, as you found so far, sometimes when you move the pole it will flip the joints around. You can see there, so keep an eye on that when you move that. And you'll see the axis that is on at the moment there. I'm going to select this bone if I can. Not so easy when it's inside the geometry. I'm going to select this bone just to show you what I'm looking at here. It can be any of these joints, but you can see here the axis is much more visible just for this explanation. When I move the pole, we move it straight up, you see it flipped. Okay, we'll move that back down again, but notice the angle isn't changing, it's just literally flipping the other way. So we will go into there and then we'll select Y, and then it will put it back to that in which it should be, and then we can move this and align this whichever way we want. It doesn't really matter. I'm just adjusting it slightly, ever so slightly. I want that to be pointing straight up. See these joints. So select that joint again that we've got selected. See that, the way it's aligned, that's brilliant. Right the way down through the middle of the wing. You need to make sure that the alignment is going through the center of the object. That hasn't changed, and then we're just going to move this forwards and move it just out the way. I want to keep this alignment true. Once you've set up the alignment to where you feel it needs to be, you can say that that's going to be the position where it's going to lock to. Remember that you can spend as long as you need to get everything just right, and then when you have got it just right, you can then decide to lock everything in place. And when I say lock, I mean freeze everything. I'm going to go back into this and then select bone again rather than a custom size. I'm going to use that just to demonstrate something there. I'm going to select this, advanced, display, and rather than say root, I'm going to click on none. We don't want none of that in the way. This pole needs to follow along with this root controller, so I'm also going to put that in there like that, and then you can just test it to make sure that everything's moving the way it should be. So everything's moving. Often the case, I like to actually have the pole put in the controller for the IK, so that when we move that IK, the pole will shift respectively. You can see that at some point it's going to flip it around, and this is where you would make those adjustments to the pole. But before I do that, I'm going to take a quick look around it. I think everything's looking fine. I'm going to select these controllers, middle mouse click, go to coordinates, and then freeze all. We've got something to go back on. And now I can go in there and select this, put it to a somewhat extreme position, and then adjust this pole so it's always functioning, even in an extreme position. And then grab this, open up this little button here which shows you the current coordinates, and then click on reset. Then it's going to show you where that pole is actually going to need to be in extreme positions. Now I want that pole at, I mean, that looks pretty good to me. When we bind this to the character, we can make some adjustments, but I say we've got things looking pretty good there. Maybe over just a little bit. That controller can certainly do with being rotated a little bit. It's a little bit too close for my liking. I think we are good to go. Let's select this again, middle mouse click, freeze all. And then in the next segment of this video I'm going to show you how we can apply dynamics to this, which is really fun and it looks really effective. Dynamic wings can give you a really realistic look, and it's really fun to play with. As you can see in this example here on the fully rigged version, the dynamic wings really does give it a more realistic flow and look to what something should be more organic. So let's go ahead and look at how we can add dynamics to wings. Luckily for us, the dynamics for wings are already actually built into the system that we've already implemented, which is in the IK chain. There's a couple of things we need to take into account when we're doing this, but there's not really a lot to be done. I think the first thing that I would like to do is just get this wing flapping just temporarily so that you can see how these dynamic wings are actually working. To do this, I'm going to select the null route and I'm going to press the Shift and C key, and the Shift and C key is going to give you a command, and we're going to start to type in vibrate, and the vibrate tag is going to come up. We're going to double click this and it's going to apply this to there. Now before we do this, we want to make sure that we middle mouse click, freeze all, so that we've got a position to go back to. Really important. Okay. So the next thing we want to do is we need to select this tag here, and we're going to have a regular pulse, and we're going to enable rotation. The rotation is going to be on the axis that's going to give us the up and down flap, although technically, and we will look at this later on, the wings actually don't flap up and down for a bee, so we will look at how to implement this properly later on. But for now, that's just press play and we can start to adjust what we've got. So let's start with this end one here, and you should start to see the wing flap. Turn it up to around about 30 and we change that frequency a little bit, and the reason why it's not moving at the moment is because all the control is being given over to the controller, and that's why. So we do indeed need to apply this to the controller, and now it should work. See the way it's rotating, so that's obviously wrong. We will apply it to this one. Let's just type in 30 degrees, and there we go, we've got some flapping going on. Now to add some level of dynamics, we need to select the IK tag, go to the tag, and then we've got this tab called Dynamics. Before we do this, we go into our forces. You can see here we've got gravity, and when we turn this on, we need to go to the gravity and turn this to 0. And you can see what it's doing already. So what we need to do is we need to adjust a few things here. I want it to have a more of a slower movement. This is called drag, and it looks as though it's kind of pulling through the air, or it's good for kind of creating this movement underwater with fish fins. So we need to control how fast this moves. And then we've got this hold position. We want to leave that full, but we need to adjust the strength. And you've got to get it just right. You want to keep it there. We go, we're starting to get it happening now. That's looking better. I'm going to go back to the tag for the moment. I'm going to change the frequency so we can just fine tune it a little bit. And I'm going to increase the frame. It's on 311 at the moment. You see just a little bit of movement in there. Let's go back to here and start to work on this. And then we're going to look down further down here. And we've got these curves. We're looking for the rotation curve. And we're going to make it so there's less at the beginning and more at the end. We've got a little bit of movement in there. That's all we need. We need just that little bit of movement. And I'm going to go back to this vibrate tag, and I'm going to disable it by the enable rotation. Then I'm going to go back to the controller that we put it on, and we're going to reset transform. You can see the dynamics are still on at the moment. We will also turn these off. And this is the state in which it's going to be bound to the actual wing. And this is the state that you can only recall if you had freezed this controller. Okay, this is why it's so important. Now, this is something that you can play with, but you can see in the final one that I've got here that this was easily achievable. You just got to tweak some settings until you've got it just flapping nicely. And this is something that you won't be able to do until you move to the next stage of actually applying it. So as an example here, if I was to select all of these joints here and then select the wing, the shift key, and then we will click on bind. Let's just go to the mesh that belongs to. We'll just select that mesh. can see I've already done it a couple of times before this. So I'm just going to make sure that we are dealing with fresh one there, what I've just showed you. I'm just going to delete the skin. I'll explain about all this later on. I'm going to just do that again quickly and then bind. It is going to try to move the other wing, but try your best to ignore that. We're going to enable the rotation and enable the dynamics. So let's enable the rotation to start with. Okay, that's the rotation, and then we will enable the dynamics, and you can see the difference that makes to like a solid plastic wing to something that's more dynamic. See that? And it's a case of there we go, that's something better already. You can see there it's much more better than the way it was before. And then of course when you go to increase the frequency, it's going to flap even more, so you need to adjust it accordingly. But there you go, that's how you apply dynamics to the wings. We're now going to grab these controllers and put them where they belong. And we're dealing with this one here. This one obviously not called the body, so we're going to grab some of this name, put this in there. This is for the wing IK. Left large wing IK. Select this and then put this over into the controller. In fact, this needs to go inside the body controller. Like that. We can close that hierarchy now. Now, you need to follow exactly the same steps to apply this to the small wing, and then you'll be done for the wings. If you like my content and have learned something from it, please give a thumbs up and subscribe. I'm not monetizing my content, it's for free, made for you in my own free time. So please give me some support back by hitting that thumbs up and subscribing. The next part of this video tutorial will be up very soon, and we will continue where we left off. So stay tuned.